Okay, so Lee, do you want to tell me about this team that you've been working with? So tell me about what's your relationship with them? What is their situation?
So it's one of those. I'll go back right to the beginning when I first engaged with them, because that's part of the scene setting for this. So there was a challenge happening for this particular client around late November 2019, which now seems a lifetime ago given the last 12 months. And what was happening is that they are a typical partnership that's delivering healthcare in the UK setup. So you're looking at a very typical older GP style surgery, and that's run by the doctors all together. And what was happening is that as a number of the staff at towards the end of their career were retiring, we were leaving younger and younger new GPs in place, and they were struggling for recruitment. It wasn't one of the most attractive areas to come into. It's an area of deprivation, and there's other kind of like contextual things happening around them and environment in the city where they are. So, but that's a GP crisis that's happening across the board in the UK, full stop. But for some reason, because they got found out to have an advert advertising a role that had like aged by about 12 to 18 months at that point, they kind of became the poster child of this problem and ended up front page of a newspaper, and a number of issues related to it that kind of like focused on them, of which they didn't feel equipped, and they weren't able to handle like the PR or the scrutiny that kind of came with it. And obviously then the people that they serve and everything around them, people start wondering if they're going to stay. It's a deprived area. Does this mean we're reducing services to people who are in deprivation? And, it became a pile on. And they actually asked me to get involved, first off, to help stabilize them as a senior team with what they were doing. They'd gone down from 12 to 7. And at the point I got involved, that 7 had become 5. And after the first meeting that I had with them, that 5 became 4. And that's how well and successful I was doing it in my first workshop with them. But actually, that was somebody recognizing their need, that they weren't going to be here to carry it and take it forward. And then this was all pre the kind of like COVID announcement and lockdown announcement. So we set up our first workshop to work with them on what they wanted to achieve, the kind of the future they saw, how they wanted to go about it, what principles they wanted in place that we could anchor to something. And we did that on the Monday. On the Tuesday, 3 out of the 4 got diagnosed with COVID, and we went into lockdown on the Friday. And that was the start of this project. Yeah.
Right. Oh, okay. So what about the challenge from a Mirror perspective? I mean, we've already talked about the fact, or we've advertised in the promotion of this call, that they're under a very pressurized environment. There are subgroups within the team that you were looking at. I think it was about 20 people, wasn't it? Altogether in this group, and they're then hybrid now. So some of them are working from home, some of them are not. What was it that made you think about Mirror?
So in that early stage, obviously, if people are testing positive in a lot of these environments, you end up having to shield your entire team. So they split the team into 2. So we had an A team and a B team, and 2 managers came in place above each of those teams. And what we began to notice as we started to look at this is each team had very different outlooks on what they were doing. And as people started to move into working from home to do some of their role, and some of those that came into the surgery to continue doing their role, we were noticing that depending who you got in and to do which work, we were developing inconsistencies. Communication was down. This was new to them. They hadn't done it before. And we'd already identified that they were talking kind of generically about alignment, as in like what they wanted to achieve as a team and get things moving in one direction. But we were seeing that people were working for very different things between themselves as well. So we had, we were looking, everybody's bringing their own values. People are working it out differently. They're answering into different groups. And we just ended up with this split in how people were approaching things. And it was just getting more and more evident, especially as people's time and ability to line manage in that kind of scenario was reducing as well. So we started to see, that split, and it was mostly around the attitude, and that was where it started to unravel. And that's where I'd come across Mirror Mirror and thought that would be a really good, appropriate tool to back some of the assumptions that we were having around the team with some level of evidence and data to support what we wanted to achieve. We thought we'd identified the things that we wanted to work on, but were we about to work on the right things? That was the important thing.
Okay, and so were they using the word alignment, or how did they pick up on what the Mirror Mirror proposition is?
So the bit for me is I was actually working with them more probably on the opposite of what alignment was. They were raising the problems that they were seeing, and we were declaring the symptoms. And that's not just because like the medical model that they kind of like all would adhere to, but that was part of it. And I was like, the things that they were talking about not seeing eye to eye and communications being fractured and no good handover, and what do we do to celebrate? How do we do things in these environments? I was like, you're not getting, we weren't just looking for consent or consensus in this from a facilitative point of view. We've got people that didn't know how to even approach these. We had got a breakdown in trust, psychological safety. We were seeing that kind of breakdown. And so I reached kind of beyond that to say, like, the opposite of what you're talking about would be to achieve alignment in what you're doing. And that's where I raised Mirror Mirror as the proposition for them and ran them through the presentation with a few key people who we thought would get the language and what we were talking about. Picking our people who could then gossip it around the team, as it were, to set the scene for what we were about to do.
So you kind of brought in the word alignment and then associated it with their problems so that they could understand what that meant, really.
Yeah.
But was that...
Yes, I think the thing is there's a natural thing where they didn't see it. It's what we probably see this with any client that you go and work with. They always think that a tool or something that is experienced in another sector or another area doesn't apply to them. And you're just like going, it does. So the main thing was just to highlight to them that with good examples and scenarios of what this would look like in practice, and just being able to say to them, like, if we achieve this, what would success look like for you? And then tying that back into some of the materials that are from Mirror Mirror and saying, if you align, this is what we mean, and this is what you can achieve, and building up that understanding slowly. So my job was to kind of go between the extremes on either side and sit in that tension as much as I could with them. Also, sometimes letting that be a little bit uncomfortable so that we stayed in the silence while they mulled it over and worked out what was happening, until eventually somebody would raise a voice and question. They had to own it for this to be successful. That was the main thing. They had to own it, and they had to agree to come on that and take part.
Okay, so they did the quick scan. They went through the interviews. Do you want to go straight to the data at this point as to what came up?
Yeah, I can show some data for this.
Great.
Am I able to share? Okay, so we went straight into, and I've done these broken down into a sheet each so that we can see what these look like. So the highest and lowest scoring team behaviors, hopefully if you can all read that. So highest behaviors, actually active support within the team was really good, and quite the spread was really from 50% to 100%. So in the highest scoring behaviors, confidence in what they're able to do, positive approach to work, making decisions kind of had a greater spread, as did welcoming their differences. But that overall that looked pretty good. Then we get down to the lowest behavior scores, and as you can see in the shaded area behind the bottom three on those, the spread is essentially 0 to 75 or 0 to 100, just to give you some idea of the polarizing way that this team was split. But it came down to clarity, understanding the needs in the wider context of where they sat, Did they feel safe to take risks? Now, oddly, it's people that were in some of the more administrative roles felt less capable of taking a risk than those in more medical-based roles. And so that we had this weird spread going on, but actually we were looking at 0 to 100 in the bottom ones of these. Perceived morale and readiness. Again, these are largely all on a scale of 0 to 100. So you can see that, you know, some people who were viewing it negatively viewed it very negatively, and other people who saw it positively really did. So, and then we get down to the bottom one there, team alignment to organization vision. Yeah, scoring over 50% with this one, but the spread was 0 to 100, understanding what that was. So the range of ratings really started to pique our interest as we reviewed this, I think would be a mild way to put it. Moving on, all participants feel need to be better established for the team to be more effective. As you can see, actually came down to a lot around this roles and responsibilities, understanding of where that sat, goals, team structure, processes, productive relationships. Nothing there that's perhaps uncommon, but actually now things that we'd got an idea about, we've now got some data to support how we're viewing it and what that meant to us. As you can see, the vision of this organization, to say that there's one strap line, but we got lots of views back on how they viewed it. Now there's some similarity in it, but 24% are be one team that puts patients first, but we've still got 5% who aren't sure and didn't even want to hazard an answer. So this was quite split. And this is where you start to see the breakdown of the split across the team as we keep going. Main purpose of the team, very similar split. Single biggest concern didn't really come down to any one thing, but communication division. But in here, we've also got, you know, don't know, not sure, nothing. So we've got 3 there that add up to quite a lot in terms of percentage, but that's either people not wanting to put their hand up and actually state it, but there's a lot to go on here. But we've got, first time we see things like feeling undervalued, and some level of the health risk that comes in it, and recruitment shows its head for the first time as well. Psychological safety behaviours, when these are in action, team members feel respected, accepted, comfortable to be themselves. As you can see, there's 3 out of the 5 on here are ranging 0 to 100 in people's responses. But freedom to raise issues and questions scores okay, but we've got to be aware that somebody has rated that very low at some point. Down to safe to take calculated risks, tolerance of mistakes, that's kind of pretty even spread across this. Task cohesion on behaviours, again, it's just a huge spread, but overall this is reasonably positive. So they feel that they are good at making decisions when they make them. Taking actions and commitment is really high. Committed to achieving a shared goal is good when they understand it, but the clarity on direction of what they're trying to do is actually quite low. But that brings us on, group confidence in team success, but they do believe in their capability. They are a highly skilled bunch. And team positivity was still good there, as was the working together effectively. Interdependence behaviours, let's have a look at that. And then we get down to active support, sufficient reflection on progress. This is really low. So this is where we started to uncover that there was a breakdown on how people were approaching appraisals, how they felt that they were managing their day-to-day. Were they given space to even look at improving anything, or did they feel it was dictated? In fact, we had it come back in some of the feedback that this felt very parent-child and not adult to adult in how they were approaching things. Points of frustration. Again, yeah, many points of frustration. As you can see, compromised by COVID pandemic obviously was going to appear, probably because of the disruption that had happened. But we see things like conflict, duplication, inefficiency, lack of joined up plans, feeling overlooked, lack of respect, not feeling like they have the same rules across the team. This was also reflected in one of the charts, that when we started to look at, do you see this as a challenge or do you see this as an opportunity? We had an almost symmetrical chart, 50% for challenge, 50% for opportunity on nearly every one that went down the list, which reflected the two teams that we were beginning to see develop under the different management. So actually, depending on who they had and who they were around was also impacting how they saw it. But they felt disconnected from maybe where the leadership would be in setting the pace, or even just having the example for them to follow and seeing this stuff in action. I think that brings us on to, yeah. And then we had this, but this, if you can see this, we had, this is a word cloud, you know, the piece that comes at the end of the report, where the word cloud, you know, words that we use to describe our team. They've got approachable, supportive, hardworking, productive, dynamic, loyal, helpful. We don't want to minimize the fact that there are words in there like battered and exhausted, or where's another one, stubborn or inefficient. But actually, overwhelmingly, this team sees themselves, and words that they would choose to describe it were overwhelmingly positive. And one of the things that this raised when we went back to them was they realized that some of the negativity was getting a louder voice than perhaps it required. And we were able to show them that actually, out of the feedback we got from, I think it was 24 of members of the team in total, which was only just a few short than the whole size. So we had really great uptake in participation. Once this was put in front of them, there was almost a calming moment where they went, it's not as bad as maybe we've thought about this. And actually this started to shift and they engaged with it more. And the reason for me taking the word cloud at the end of the report and turning it into these, we turn it to these little thank you boxes to give to some of the people who supported the project, and it's their investment. And then we put it on posters so that members of staff would be bumping into it and seeing it around the building. And we used that as the basis of one of the workshops, where you can see on the left there, we made it a poster on the wall, but we put some effort in to make sure it was designed so that they could actually see it, refer to it. It was going to be prominent. And then we asked them to explain, what did you see on this? You know, how might we better establish these areas in order for the team to be more effective? And we focused on those ones from the beginning, which is around goals, processes, productive relationships. That wasn't the extent of what got put on the wall, by the way. That's just at the moment I photographed it. They got quite full of Post-its as everybody came up and left their comments, left their notes. But that was one of the nice touches at the end that kind of won them over and really warmed them to this process, that they were about to get a voice into something and we were about to rebuild the trust.
That's really nice. I really like that word cloud piece. Fascinating. Thank you very much for that. So I want to know though, when they saw the report, did you hand out the whole report to them?
No, so first stage for the presentation, I gave them a report much like I just showed you, so that we could focus on it and also not overwhelm them where they might not be, because there was a focus on, you know, what does organization mean? What does team mean? What does external context mean? So we ran it through on a simplified version of the report so that it became much easier for them to focus on one thing at a time and not get carried away. But we did make the entire report available to them after, and put that and gave them access to it, and started to set the precedent that we were going to do the rest of this project out loud with transparency, and that nothing would ever be hidden from them. And if they had a question, if there was a point for them to raise, they had full access to everything. And, you know, unless it actually breached something, or there was an actual data protection kind of safeguarding or something like that came up, they're going to have access to everything through this entire process, so that they understand that's what trust and openness looks like.
So I'm dying to know then, when they saw the results, what was the reaction to, whatever you can remember?
So it, in one sense, we had that kind of like, there was an initial gasp, especially when they saw some of the positive words, realizing that I'd even say some of them know that maybe they didn't put that word, but it's now a big word. So they knew other people had said it, and they all of a sudden went, people think this of our team. Some people found it quite emotional. There were tears from some. It was quite a visceral reaction for quite a lot of them to see it presented back to them. And that was the bit for me where they realized that actually we're not going to cover anything up. There are negative words in there as well of people and how they feel at this moment in time. And we're not going to ignore that. We're going to acknowledge it and we're going to own it. But actually, we're also going to hook ourselves into what is positive about this and what we really believe and say on a day-to-day basis, not to minimize the negativity or minimize, where things are a problem and we need to address it. But actually, we can look to those positive things. And actually, this might be better than we first thought when we began. And maybe this idea of alignment isn't some far off pipe dream, but actually is very achievable for us as a team. And even though we might not say it on a day-to-day basis, we do value each other.
Right. So the last question I've got then is, so how did you put this data to work? What have you done so far? Because I know this was very recent, but what's been done and what's the plan and how's it all sort of being used?
So we've reflected back like the positivity. We've continued what we have these meetings on a Thursday now, which are like an all team. So they switch kind of between like team huddle, town hall kind of like setup, but also are participatory. And, we hold that space for people to talk about stuff. We've implemented a well-being program. So people are now learning and we're teaching them how to do proper check-ins, actually see how each other are doing. But we're also doing them so regularly that they have to talk to people across the team who they wouldn't normally talk to. So they're now actually asking people questions about what they're doing, how they're doing, and what's going on. And that's kind of like to build kind of a bit more cross-functionally and stop the silos that were coming around some of the roles. We're learning how to rebuild the psychological safety by working openly and transparently, giving them some language around what we're doing. But we're also not going to say that this is going to be fixed by a single workshop from this. We've actually got a 90-day program that we're starting of kind of interventions on many different things for the team to work on the roles and responsibilities, review processes, get voices into everything that we're doing, but also work out how as a team will we celebrate. There's a point when we're going to reopen and the public will be coming back through the doors. When we do that and we achieve that moment, what things are we going to bring with us? What attitude do we want? What does it look like to be future focused? So that's the big one. Silly things in like helping them as a team. There's people there working really, really hard. We put a toaster in the kitchen. It's one of those, silly things that have just not been addressed, but actually in terms of looking after them, making them feel valued and heard, it came up that that's one of the things they wanted, better preparation. Some of them start really early in the morning. So that was really good. And we're kind of looking for that soft measure of the well-being thing allows us to see the improvement in their well-being over time. So now as a result of what we're doing, we're tracking that as a metric, and it's a soft one, but actually that actually is understand the impact of this work and their attitudes to what they're doing to see it more fully.
Was there a kind of, so what you've done is you've brought this into a far bigger program of work, which is great. Was there a point though that you looked at the charts and had them get more clarity, for example, on and tighten up the purpose and the vision piece? Or is that
we kind of skipped past that one a little bit, I think. But the understanding where they sit and what it looks like to be part of something bigger was that although they've got a unit kind of delivery, they didn't quite understand that they were commissioned to do that work and it was part of something bigger and what role they played. And so to minimize kind of like the overwhelm of just showing them the big thing, we showed where what they do fits into that. And we've had that done up in similar posters to put around the building. And we're workshopping on, this piece here is unchanging. This is like, our remit about improving healthcare and health for all and access to healthcare, that bit's kind of set for us. But on a day-to-day basis, what that looks like in working it out, we're doing some work around guiding principles. What principles do we need as a team to achieve this and be a healthy team delivering healthcare outcomes? So we've kind of switched, what does health look like for you? How do we put that in place? Maybe that's health in your relationships, your finances, or maybe it might be physical health or mental health. But then we've come to, where does that fit in? When you're healthy, how does that help you deliver healthcare for others? And what does that look like? So it's tying in maybe some of what they want to achieve personally into how we want to outwork as an organization and where that fits into the kind of like the larger remit that's put out with our county and then across England under a much larger remit.
Right. Okay. And unfortunately, it's too early in the workshop program to have generated measurement results, but we will be writing up a case study and including those in due course. But before I then hand across, and what I'd like to do is sort of open this up and pass across to people who've written questions in the text field, and then we can just kind of just pile in or whatever. But how do you feel that it went with Mirror Mirror as opposed to going ahead without Mirror Mirror?
Yeah, so I think I said this, I think in one of the little video clips that you'd put out. It's like a year ago when we started this process, I think we had some insight and we were raising assumptions that we wanted to test. And we had an idea that we were going to proceed and we would have done some good work. And I think we would have achieved something and we could have improved things. Since putting the Mirror Mirror process in place and actually getting some evidence to support what we were thinking, we realized that we can now prioritize the right thing. And actually it's reordered and restructured the program that we're about to deliver. And we're going to put appropriate resource to the right thing, not just a good thing. So as a result, we're going to see greater impact sooner. And that is going to tick something off for all of those who are involved in this across the team that allows us to celebrate sooner as well. And as a result, we can get to those other things, but we're now prioritizing properly and we're doing the right things. I just don't think we'd have achieved that without a tool to help us dig behind it.
He's good, isn't he? Music to my ears. Woohoo! No,
I wasn't paid for this.
I'll do the transfer later. Okay, I'm going to take you off spotlight now and just open up, and perhaps if I may go straight to Jane. Jane, you had a couple of questions. Do you want to go ahead?
Sure. Lee, the first question that struck me was just building on that point that you had there, was essentially about vision. And you said that you started off with, I think what I heard was that you started off with 4 leaders and then that went down to 3 very quickly because one of them took themselves out of the picture. Were they aligned on what kind of practice they wanted to be and their vision? Because I was very struck by the almost endless list of reasons that people came to work, really.
Yeah, so when it was in the early workshop just before we did lockdown, when we were putting things onto paper and looking at this with that senior team, that it evidenced that distinction between, there were 3 who were very much seeing this the exact same way, very tight, very connected, really, really viewed it. Not that it made the other person feel outside of it, but I think they recognized that they weren't the person who was probably going to take this forward. So the 3 that remained is like, I had 100% of those that remained who were on board with where this wanted to go on that senior team.
And sorry, let me just be clear, because I'm not quite sure if I made myself clear. I mean the vision for the practice itself, not for this process with Mirror Mirror.
Yeah, the vision for the practice. They were reciting it. They knew it. The thing is, it is documented. It's just not visible or used in anything like.
Okay.
Can you say marketing? But it's not used in anything. Like, it was not in their onboarding process. It's not in the staff handbook. It's not in anything else that went around it. But if you were signed in as a partner, it's front page, which is probably why it sat with some of those who'd been in the, had been there the shortest amount of time, had it more top of mind.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, interesting.
Any other questions, Jane?
Well, you know the answer to that, Lindsay. So yes, I was waiting for somebody else to say something. Okay, I shall jump in again. So when you started out on the process, given that you had identified the 2 teams, I'm not quite sure how far into the whole process you had the 2 teams, but did you have buy-in from everybody in the practice for the Mirror Mirror process, given, and the reason I'm asking the question is given the differences that there were in people's view of where the practice was going, etc., etc. I wonder, did they feel anxious or did they feel really pleased that this is a discussion they were going to have now?
So it probably no surprise that I'm going to say it was almost 50-50 representative of where the team sat. We had one who saw it as an opportunity, and we had one who saw it with a bit more higher anxiety. Now, the anxiety, as we dug into that, came from the fact that they thought that this was going to be really consultative. They were expecting kind of like me to be there, do some work, deliver a report, and mandate what was going to action and how we were going to go about it. So they immediately thought they were losing voice and they were losing their input into the process. So the first two sessions or so, maybe even 3 sessions, I think it might have been, I spent most of my time explaining that I'm not a consultant in this process. I'm here as your facilitator. And what that meant for the team, how we were going to harness the voice of the team, how we were going to dig into the fact that we believed that they were the content and I was bringing process, and that, together that was going to make a great outcome. But actually their job was to bring the content. And as we started pushing past that, we lowered some anxiety, enough to remove suspicion of me. But that mostly was also because by that point I was there with him at least 2 days a week, shoulder tapping, sitting with people, shadowing people. So it became really invested, and that's helped. I mean, I don't think you ever remove all the suspicion, because they still think you're acting on something some of the time, but overall they started to see that what we said we would do, we did.
Thank you.
Nick, you had a question, didn't you, next?
Yeah, I did. Thanks, Lee. Really fascinating case study. Really interesting. Obviously, slightly difficult without knowing the ins and outs. So appreciate maybe a slightly naivety in my question. But obviously, this team will have stakeholders, maybe internal stakeholders, external stakeholders, or whatever. And for some, it will be the proof of the pudding is in the eating. And whilst they realign themselves and make great changes, which are really positive changes, quite often, perceptions, as I say, whether it's from other stakeholders within the organisation, clearly will take longer to change. And as I acknowledged in my question, it's probably too early. But I almost would sort of boil it down in very simplistic terms that sometimes if a team is perceived as maybe lacking in some way, or some degree of negativity from an external stakeholder, sometimes you need a quick win to buy yourself some time to really put the building blocks in place. And I just wonder whether that question is applicable in this case, and how they're feeling about maybe changing perceptions with their wider stakeholders.
Yeah, so one of the wider stakeholders is the people who are paying for this work, who are the commissioning body over them. And there is a thing of how we report that back and how we show it. Now, removing, there's obvious ones, being able to recruit. And I will say that since doing this and landing some vision and values work, being able to state mission and improving the interview process more than the onboarding process, actually, to have a kind of like values-led, a principle-based interview set up, I've actually recruited 2 people and about to recruit more. So that's one, in one sense, is a quick win, because those people coming in were evidencing now that something that hadn't happened for a very long period of time when we were losing, now we are filling really quickly and positively. And if you went and spoke to any of those as well, their pack has got this stuff highlighted in it. And now we're working out how we take that to the rest of the team. And we're involving the rest of the team in the recruitment, even if it's not a comparable job, but that they actually see people. So that's one. The second one is that staff churn happens and sickness happens when you're not looking after well-being. And this has been a difficult 12 months, particularly in this sector. The other thing is evidencing back, even just on some level of outcome of, have you had improved well-being? Even, simple things like emoji scales, even of like, how do you feel today? And regular check-in has been evidence enough to address those early pieces. Obviously, there'll be much more going on. And as we get to the end of the 2 to 3 month period, at the kind of like 90-day mark, There'll be much more expectation about what we're showing we've done, of which Mirror Mirror is only a part, and then it will be looking at the other factors that need to improve, and that could be quality marks and the other things that they need to do as statutory obligations. But no, really valid. But I believe the perception is changing from the person who led the funding piece. It's now how we get that even wider. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Sheila, you had your hand up a while back.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm still just a little bit confused around the numbers, Lee, because you talked at first about how you went from 20 and then quickly dropped down to the 4. So how many participants on the team completed the survey, and then how many participated in your follow-up sessions?
Okay, so the overall team size is about 27. Okay. That's the entire team, of which the senior team had been the original 7 I spoke about, which dropped from 7 to 5 to 4 and then to 3 eventually. So in terms of, they didn't participate in the Mirror Mirror piece, but the total number of participants who did it was just over 20, which included them. So yeah, sorry, that was the separation between the senior team who have the ultimate responsibility, actual liability for it, and then like the employed staff team who make it up into a bigger piece.
Okay, that's perfect. Thank you.
Michael?
Thank you. It's been really, really insightful. I think, and slightly building on the last point, I'm curious about the sort of alignment. Is it the alignment of the whole team, or is it the alignment of the senior management team amongst themselves? Because in my experience of working with teams, you get this sort of confusion in a senior management team sometimes about whether they're working on their own vision, purpose and what have you, or they're working on the vision, purpose of the wider team or organization for which they are responsible. And it causes massive confusion with people tripping over themselves the whole time, a lot of the time not really realizing which they're working on, and the distinction between the two.
Yeah, so in that early piece, I think that had been evidenced when we were right at the start, when we'd just gone down to the 5. When we got down to the 3, they were much more about working for the whole team. They wanted to see this organizationally as in the interests of everybody in serving them, and were much more considerate of that happening elsewhere than maybe the others were, who were like, no, we've got a job to do, we do this, and then this happens, and that does that to serve us doing this. And so theirs was kind of more hierarchical in terms of like, we align, they align, but they align behind us, to no, we want to approach this much more as a whole unit to do this change piece. And once we've changed, we can look at some of those nuances, or even maybe where teams within teams, especially if they grow again, because once you get above 20, 25, or even towards 30, that's probably not one team anymore. So that piece is that the leaders are seeing this much more working with everybody to get everyone going together on what they want to achieve together in, I can't remember, I've actually got a line that they came up with for it, about providing best possible quality of service within confidential, safe environment, working together, that kind of thing. They're owning that all together.
Carolyn, you had a question in the chat.
Yes, thank you, Lee. That's really, really insightful. Thank you. My question kind of dovetailed on what was already discussed with this concept of, smaller teams, big teams, and how they interacted, who the decision makers were. And it was more along the line of the share mental model of what alignment was or wasn't, whether it was relevant to the team, et cetera. And so I would love to know how much educating you did, or you found yourself doing with this group on the concept and the benefits of alignment itself, given maybe a more hierarchical model, or people who say do something and then this happens, it's kind of like an autonomic response, if you will, that happens versus those, I'm curious because I'm quite aware of some of these more hierarchical mental models that some people have in a place like that, and it happens everywhere. So yeah. I'm curious to know how you referred to that a little earlier on the alignment. What was it, what wasn't it, and how you worked your way around that?
Yeah, I mean, so there were several parts to that, because we had going into the lockdown and having team A, team B, we actually lost all of the planned training days that this work would have landed on. So some of the vehicle for us doing some of that work was actually removed, which was made some of that more tricky. But in terms of kind of like educating them and talking to them, the teams that I could work with were starting with the managers of the two teams, and then kind of filtering it down and shoulder tapping and working with individuals around their job. And I did most of that specifically around decision making. And it was there are some things that are hierarchical. There are processes that have approval strands and you have to go through them that way. But there was other stuff where, did you know that if you hold the information, then the decision making on this matter should be pushed to you, not you devolving the responsibility for a decision to someone who has the position but not the information. So we started to introduce that concept to them, that it didn't stop anybody's contribution or the value that they had, but actually decision making would sit with who had the best information. And that's how we would move it out. So that started to get them thinking more cross-functionally between who was doing things, rather than just hierarchically, as in pass this to someone senior to say yes or no, or they kept referring to it as passing the monkey. People who just offloaded everything because they were like, I can't take a risk, and but it was more fear of getting it wrong. And we were like saying, but if you have the information, you make this, we've got your back, and you are fine to make that decision. And there's processes now around it that it's always got checks and balances in place anyway. There's very little in this sector that you could do without it having a check in place. So it was very much one-to-one, apart from with the two practice managers, where I could sit with them as a small team to talk about this and how they would outwork it.
Very interesting how you wrap that around. Yeah. I'd just be curious. It'd be it'd be good to hear the long term of this, Lee. I take it you're part of the team. I may have missed that part. Are you part of the team, or were you brought in?
I'm brought in. Okay. Yeah, I was external and brought in, but I think my embedding there and the kind of like their commitment to the longevity of a project means that I'm not disappearing, because we all know that you can start a project and you can call it an alignment project, you can call it a resilience project, but actually at the end of that, if they don't learn how to keep it embedded, and they don't get to follow it by example, and they don't understand how to take action on what's been delivered, then it just becomes either a dusty document on the shelf or it fails. So they've committed to keep me going back for quite an extended period to work with them ongoing about the implementation piece.
Thank you.
A question I'd like to ask directly is that, a few people say that they would, or at least we get the feeling that people don't want to do mirror because they fear that they'd be opening the can of worms, that by exposing some of these conflicts, that people wouldn't have the skills to manage that. Did you feel that risk at all? And how much did you feel that your skill as a facilitator was being lent on to get around that?
I think you often step into things and kind of like, you do them scared on some of those, because you don't know what you're going to open when you pull into it. But you have to carry a level of self-assurance and balance that with a level of self-awareness. So I made myself accountable to the senior partners who were there about what the potential risks might be. To get them to have the buy-in that if these things get raised, we're going to have to respond very quickly to address them as things might come up. But I was able to have that conversation and work it because of the relationship that had been built. So I think that the importance there is, again, I worked with them openly and with an honesty so that we had the transparency, and tried my best to demonstrate what this would look like if we all worked this way. But then as things were raised, it felt a lot safer. So we actually started to mitigate the risk as we moved through the conversations.
Yeah, okay. Jane.
It's a really interesting story, Lee. And one of the things that you said at the end of your piece was about maintaining the momentum by integrating Mirror Mirror with everything else that was going on. And just picking up on that, and also what you said about helping them to embed. One of our natural behaviours, well, in corporate behaviour, is to revert to silo when it's safer, or when it feels expedient to do that. What do you think they're going to have to do, and what do you see your role as being in helping them to recognise that there is a joining of dots here, and that it isn't just Mirror Mirror or any other of the other activities that are going on that's going to help them?
So I kind of gave a very quick snapshot on the recruitment process and how we interviewed, and that when they interviewed, they used people from other areas of the team to just take part in something that they would normally have had zero visibility on, right? And that, first off, let them see. And what we're doing is that going forward on the embedding, is the responsibility to embed is always going to be made up of a cross-functional team who are, in terms of like a change cycle or how we're implementation cycle, is we're handing it to you as a representative of everything that's going on. You're not going to carry this for the rest of your life. You're going to carry it for the period that we do this cycle, at which point you can either carry it on or you hand on the baton. And this is where we're building in that reflective piece where they said they didn't have time to reflect. But now they get to talk together, and they're responsible for disseminating the information and the communications back. So, I mean, on top of this, we've implemented Office 365. We're using Microsoft Teams. We've made the conversations visible and open for everything that's going on. My role in that is project facilitator rather than project manager, is just to help them hold that space, learn how to use a few simple tools and methods, probably some team canvases or project canvases that we can put things on, and get them to present back at the weekly meetings and town halls on what's going on, even if it's just the odd word and, you know, encouragement or recognition of somebody and what they've contributed. But it's always going to be cross-functional. So even if it's not a thing that will directly impact you, you are still going to be part of overseeing, so that you understand where it fits in the whole. And, you know, I'm saying that we haven't done one of those yet because we're not off the back of it, but that's what we're setting them up for, and that's how we're talking about it. It's going to be much more inclusive.
I just want to kind of, I'm just going to share my screen for a second and make a point about something that I felt was really interesting from your presentation of the data. Do you remember, I'm not sure how many people were aware that the lowest behavior scores that we tracked through 2020, they were the words. So it was, this is just a dummy data sample report, so they don't all appear in here, but unclarity on direction and remit and insufficient reflection on progress were the two behaviors that came into the lowest 5 behavior scores all last year, and they were on your report too. It's just a trend. It's I mean, when I saw that, it was just like, oh, here we go again. It's almost like we just need to focus on those 2 issues as a constant. So I thought that was really interesting. And then something else I wanted to ask you about on this page here, we have renamed this factors page, it's now called the Horizon Scan, because before people were looking at the factors page going, what do you mean by factor? When they saw this page for themselves, I don't think you've got that in your presentation, but when they saw this about what is going on for their organization, forget the industry level. I know that caused problems because they were trying to define industry. But when they looked at what factors are happening in the organization and how is that impacting them, was that was that a useful chart to back up their discussions, or how did that hit them?
So that was one that we talked about separately from the general presentation, because there were one or two where I don't know whether contextually it would have sat, but with I think I had about 11 people that were talking about this one where it was more applicable, and their thing was it wasn't about being divided or split even in how they viewed it. It was just the fact about how many things could impact them. And the number of things, like we're not dealing with one problem. We're not dealing with only one thing that's going to arise, or, you know, the typical 3 to 5 kind of like, your normal strategy handbook. It's they looked at it and went, this is actually multifaceted depending on where you enter and interact with what we've got going on. And so they wanted to make that more manageable and to see it. But actually the first shift was to get more people viewing things as opportunity than challenge, because some of these things aren't going away. So how are we going to do that? So it's become much more a language exercise and equipping.
Yeah, and I think part of going through the process of alignment is teaching them about that. Kind of covered that in brief a little bit. How much do you feel that was going on? How much do you feel that their maturity around the process of alignment has kind of stepped up a bit?
I think so. The natural things is that when I go in now, everybody talks to me. It's everybody's willing to catch you and say something, and if they say something, they know that you're noting it. Whereas when I first used to go in, it was very just practical. It's like, check you in, check your temperature, make sure you've got a place to sit, and off you go. Now people want some time, they want to get your attention. And I think that's the biggest shift, is just in the personal aspect of it. And I think the moment you see them feeling more comfortable with whoever on your team is there helping deliver it, once you get past that, that they're beginning to see the value and what this means to them and how it's going to improve things. And they're taking ownership now for the outcome of it, not just the bit that I'm, when I'm there. It's not about making me a cup of tea or something. It is actually, if I catch Lee's ear, I'm participating. This is great.
Good. Right, we've got time for one last question. Michael, you've got your hand up.
Lee, just very quickly, sort of mutual accountability is kind of key to alignment. And I'm sort of curious about how you go about generating an understanding of what mutual accountability looks like in practice.
Between them as a team, or from me to their team, or both?
Between them as a team.
Between them as a team. Yeah, this is one of the things that we're looking at in getting the detail. I think some of it is documenting it. Starting the wellbeing chats has started the conversations. Now they're learning how to talk to people who aren't in their own team and not just their best mates. So we're trying to break down some of those barriers, but raising the what am I moving on, and what today, or what am I doing this week that's going to move the needle in my role. And actually that's a phrase we've introduced. So like, what are you working on that's going to move the needle this week? And they're just stating 1 or 2 things that they're going to do. And actually then by doing it, we check in at the end of the week and people say, I did that. That's the first step of visibility, stating 1 or 2 things that you're going to do, and then actually as a group celebrating it to say that we see you actually in this, and we hear you, and actually we see you and hear you when it's gone wrong, and we see you and hear you when it's gone right. And actually, but you're safe here to say that. You're not going to, that's part, is the psychological safety part as well in tandem.
Okay, we're on the hour. Lee, I think you've done a fantastic job of explaining this case study to us.
Thank you.
And also working with the team that you're working with. So we will look forward to helping you with the case study and presenting that so that we can share it further, and also the measurement report so that we can see what the team got out of it. Sorry, we can't take any more questions right now. And thank you very much for joining. We'll see you next time.
Thanks so much.
Thanks very much.